while Chicago slept. The story I will tell you today, you should listen to it only when you are asleep. If you can't sleep, if you feel depressed, if you hate life too much, then definitely listen to the story. I hope I will make it possible for you to fall asleep. Tonight, we travel to a city that never truly rests, Chicago. During the day, the city moves fast. Car horns echo through crowded streets. Trains rattle above the avenues. People rush past each other without looking up. But at night, Chicago becomes softer. The noise fades away. The cold air settles between the buildings. And for a few quiet hours, the city belongs to the people who work while everyone else sleeps. The people nobody notices. The people who quietly prepare tomorrow for everyone else. The first person we meet tonight is Samuel Harper. Samuel is a subway cleaner. He is 62 years old, with tired eyes and slow, careful movements that come from years of hard work. Every night at 1:10 a.m., Samuel leaves his small apartment on the south side of the city and walks 3 blocks through the winter cold toward the train station. Snow falls gently around him tonight. Tiny white flakes drift beneath the orange streetlights, while the city breathes slowly in the darkness. Samuel pulls his old blue jacket tighter around his chest. The wind near the lake is colder this time of year, much colder. Before leaving home tonight, Samuel paused at the doorway for a moment. He always does. His apartment is small and quiet now. Too quiet. There is an old coffee mug beside the sink that nobody uses anymore. A faded yellow blanket folded neatly over the couch. And near the window sits a dying little plant his wife once loved dearly. She passed away 4 years ago. Sometimes, Samuel still catches himself listening for her footsteps in the kitchen. Grief is strange that way. It leaves little echoes behind. The subway station is nearly empty when Samuel arrives. Only a few flickering lights remain on above the platform. Far down the tunnel, cold air hums softly through the darkness. The last train departed several minutes ago. Now the station feels almost forgotten. Samuel likes that feeling. At night, the city finally slows down enough for people to hear themselves think. He unlocks the first train car slowly. The metal door creaks open. Inside, the fluorescent lights flicker awake one by one. Empty coffee cups rest beneath seats. Old newspapers lie scattered across the floor. Someone forgot a child's red mitten near the window. Samuel bends down and picks it up carefully. For a moment, he simply stares at it in silence. It reminds him of his granddaughter. He has not seen her in almost 2 years. His daughter moved to California after an argument neither of them ever truly fixed. Life creates distances quietly sometimes. Not through hatred, just through time. Samuel places the mitten gently beside the lost and found box and begins cleaning the train. Slowly, carefully. He takes pride in his work, even if nobody notices it. Tomorrow morning, thousands of strangers will step inside these train cars without ever thinking about the man who cleaned them during the night. And somehow, Samuel is okay with that. There is a certain peace in being invisible. Meanwhile, across the city near Lake Michigan, Maria Ortiz stands alone inside the kitchen of a luxury hotel. Maria is 29 years old. She works the night shift, preparing pastries before sunrise. Warm, golden light spills across the empty kitchen while soft jazz music plays quietly from an old radio near the ovens. Outside the large windows, snow continues falling over downtown Chicago. Maria carefully removes a tray of chocolate croissants from the oven. The smell of butter and warm bread fills the room instantly. She closes her eyes for just a second and breathes deeply. The scent reminds her of childhood mornings. Her mother used to bake late at night too, and she always said, "Good food makes lonely people feel less alone." Maria still believes that. Maybe that is why she works so hard. Most nights, Maria sleeps only 4 hours. After work, she returns home to help her younger brother get ready for school. Their parents died years ago. Since then, Maria has spent most of her life taking care of someone else. And yet, she still smiles more than most people do. Tonight feels colder than usual. The giant city outside looks endless beneath the falling snow. Maria watches the empty streets from the kitchen window and wonders how many people are awake right now, feeling exactly the same loneliness she feels. Probably more than anyone realizes. While Samuel cleaned empty subway cars beneath the city, and while Maria baked warm pastries inside the quiet hotel kitchen, another man drove slowly through the falling snow above them. His name was Leonard Brooks. Most people called him Leo. Leo had been driving a taxi in Chicago for almost 23 years. He preferred the night shift, not because it paid more, but because the city felt more honest after midnight. During the day, people wore masks. At night, they became quieter, more tired, more real. Leo's taxi moved slowly through downtown streets glowing beneath wet reflections of neon signs and traffic lights. Soft jazz music played through the speakers, while the heater hummed gently near his feet. Outside, snow drifted across the windshield like tiny pieces of ash floating through the dark. Leo liked driving during snowstorms. The city became calmer somehow. Even angry people spoke more softly when snow was falling. At a red light, Leo reached for the old photograph taped beside the dashboard. The edges were worn now. In the picture stood a little girl wearing a bright green winter coat and a missing front tooth. His daughter, Emma. The photo had been taken 15 years ago, before everything changed, before the divorce, before the silence. Leo had not spoken to Emma in over 3 years. At first, he told himself she was simply busy, college, friends, life. But deep down, he knew the truth was more painful than that. Over time, he had slowly become a stranger in his own daughter's life. And now, he wasn't sure how to fix it anymore. Some relationships don't break all at once. They fade quietly, phone call by phone call, missed birthday by missed birthday, until one day, two people realize they no longer know how to speak to each other. The radio dispatcher crackled through the speaker. "Pickup requested near West Elm Street." Leo grabbed the wheel tighter. "Copy that." His voice sounded rough tonight, tired. A few minutes later, he pulled up outside a small hospital entrance. A woman stood beneath the glowing lights, holding her coat tightly against the cold. She looked exhausted. Leo stepped out and opened the trunk for her suitcase. "Airport?" he asked gently. The woman nodded. "Yeah, O'Hare." Her voice almost disappeared into the wind. Inside the taxi, silence settled naturally between them. The woman leaned her head against the window while snow-covered buildings drifted past outside. Leo didn't ask questions. Night workers learn something important after enough years. Sometimes people don't want conversation. Sometimes they just want quiet company. After several minutes, the woman suddenly spoke. "My father died tonight." Leo glanced at her briefly through the mirror. "I'm sorry." She nodded slowly, but said nothing else. The city lights reflected softly against tears she was trying hard not to show. Leo understood that kind of silence. Grief often makes people quieter instead of louder. As they crossed a bridge above the frozen river, the woman stared out at the sleeping city. "It's strange," she whispered. "The whole world keeps moving, even after someone dies." Leo thought about that for a moment. Then he answered softly, "Yeah, it does." Another silence filled the taxi, but this one felt warmer somehow, less lonely. A few blocks away, Samuel was still cleaning train cars underground. Maria was arranging fresh pastries behind glass displays inside the hotel cafe. And above them all, snow continued falling across Chicago, quietly connecting strangers who would probably never truly meet. Yet somehow, they were all carrying the same tired hearts through the same cold night. Eventually, the airport appeared ahead through the snow. Large, glowing lights cut through the darkness, while planes rested silently in the distance, like giant sleeping birds. Leo pulled the taxi to the curb. The woman handed him cash, then paused before leaving. "Thank you," she said quietly. Leo nodded. "I hope you get home safe." She gave him a weak little smile before disappearing into the airport crowd. And just for a moment, Leo thought about calling his daughter. He even picked up his phone at the next red light. Emma Harper. His thumb hovered above the screen. but after a long moment, he slowly locked the phone again. Not tonight. Maybe another night. Outside, the snow continued falling over Chicago, and somewhere in the distance, the first faint signs of morning were beginning to appear. The voice on the radio. By 3:40 in the morning, most of Chicago had fallen completely silent. The office buildings stood dark and empty. Apartment windows slowly lost their light, one by one. Even the traffic had almost disappeared now. Snow continued drifting gently across the city. Soft, weightless, endless. And somewhere, high above the sleeping streets, inside a small radio station on the 20th floor of an old downtown building, a man named Elliot Reed adjusted his microphone and spoke quietly into the darkness. "Good morning, night people," he said softly. "This is Elliot with you once again, keeping you company while the city sleeps." His voice was calm and warm, the kind of voice that sounded better at night. For almost 11 years, Elliot had hosted a late-night radio program called After Midnight. It wasn't a famous show. Most people had never heard of it. But truck drivers listened to him. Night nurses listened to him. Taxi drivers, factory workers, lonely insomniacs sitting alone in dark kitchens at 3 a.m. People who needed another human voice nearby, even if they never called in. The studio lights were dim tonight. A small desk lamp glowed beside Elliot's coffee cup, while old jazz music played softly in the background. Outside the giant windows behind him, snow covered the rooftops of Chicago. From up here, the city looked peaceful, almost fragile. Elliot leaned back in his chair and glanced at the clock on the wall. 3:43 a.m. The loneliest hour of the night. At least that's what he always believed. Because by this time, most distractions disappear. There are no crowded restaurants anymore, no busy stores, no daytime noise. Only people alone with their thoughts. Elliot understood loneliness very well. 5 years ago, his wife Claire passed away after a long illness. After that, he stopped sleeping properly. Some nights, he wandered his apartment until sunrise. Other nights, he drove aimlessly through empty streets with nowhere to go. Eventually, he realized something strange. The city was full of people just like him. People pretending to be okay during the day, then quietly falling apart at night. That realization changed his radio show forever. He stopped trying to sound entertaining. Instead, he simply sounded human. And somehow, people connected to that. Tonight,
Elliot opened a small notebook lying beside the microphone.
Inside were letters from listeners collected over the years. Some were happy. Most were not. One letter simply read, "Your voice makes my apartment feel less empty." Elliot had never forgotten that sentence, because sometimes people do not need solutions. Sometimes they only need to feel heard. Far below the radio station, Leo's taxi rolled slowly through another red light. The radio played quietly inside the cab. Elliot's voice filled the silence. "And wherever you are tonight," Elliot continued gently, "I hope you remember something important. Surviving another difficult day is enough. You do not always have to be strong." Leo stared silently at the snowy road ahead. For some reason, those words hit harder tonight. Underground, Samuel sat alone on a subway platform during his short break. A vending machine hummed beside him while he drank weak coffee from a paper cup. His knees hurt more during winter now. Getting old felt strange. Inside your mind, you still felt young sometimes, but your body slowly stopped agreeing. Samuel pulled his old radio closer beside him. Elliot's late-night show echoed softly through static. "You know," Elliot said with a small, tired laugh, "I think nighttime teaches us things daytime never can." Samuel smiled faintly to himself. He had been listening to this radio host for years, almost every night. Though they had never met, the voice had become strangely familiar. Meanwhile, inside the luxury hotel kitchen, Maria finished arranging pastries behind the front display counter. The lobby remained empty except for a sleepy receptionist reading a magazine near the entrance. Maria wiped flour from her hands and stretched her sore shoulders carefully. She was exhausted tonight, more exhausted than usual. But before leaving, she quietly turned on the small cafe radio near the coffee machines. Elliot's voice immediately filled the empty room. "And if tonight feels heavy," he said softly, "maybe that's because you've been carrying too much for too long." Maria froze for just a second. Her eyes lowered toward the floor, because deep down, she knew he was right. Outside, the snowstorm slowly grew heavier. Wind curled between skyscrapers, while streetlights glowed through thick, white air. The city felt smaller now, softer, as if the entire world had been wrapped inside silence. Back inside the radio station, Elliot removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. Only 1 hour remained before sunrise. 1 more hour before the city woke up again. 1 more hour before loneliness became easier to hide. He looked down at another listener letter, resting near the microphone. Then, after a long pause, he spoke quietly. "Tonight, I want to tell you a story." And all across Chicago, without knowing it, several tired strangers continued listening. The nurse who only saw her son sleeping. By 4:25 in the morning, the snow had covered most of the city streets. Chicago looked softer now. The sharp edges of sidewalks and rooftops disappeared beneath layers of white, and the entire city seemed quieter than before. Even the air itself felt slower. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, on the north side of the city, fluorescent lights glowed endlessly above long, empty hallways. Hospitals never truly sleep. Machines continued beeping softly behind closed doors. Elevators opened and closed with quiet mechanical sighs. Tired nurses walked from room to room, carrying warm blankets and paper charts. And among them was Olivia Bennett, 34 years old, single mother, night shift nurse. Olivia had worked nights for almost 6 years now, long enough for her body to forget what normal sleep felt like. At this hour, exhaustion settled deep inside her bones. Not dramatic exhaustion, not the kind people talk about, just a quiet heaviness she carried everywhere now, the kind that builds slowly over years. Olivia stepped into room 214, carrying fresh medication and a cup of water. An elderly man lay asleep beneath dim hospital light, while snow drifted softly beyond the window behind him. She adjusted his blanket carefully. Small, gentle movements. Over time, nursing had taught her something important. People remember kindness most when they are vulnerable. Not money, not success, just kindness. The old man opened his eyes slightly. "Is it morning yet?" he whispered weakly. Olivia smiled softly. "Not yet." The man nodded and slowly drifted back to sleep. For a moment, Olivia stood there quietly, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor beside him. Sometimes hospitals made her think about how fragile human life really was. A normal Tuesday could suddenly become the worst day someone had ever lived through. And yet, outside these walls, the world continued moving as if nothing had happened. Back at the nurse's station, Olivia sat carefully in her chair and rubbed her tired eyes. Beside her coffee cup sat a small, folded drawing made with crayons. A crooked little house beneath a giant yellow sun. Her son Noah had drawn it 3 days ago. At the bottom, in messy handwriting, he wrote, "For Mommy, so she don't feel sad at work." Olivia stared at the drawing for a long moment, then slowly smiled. A painful kind of smile, because most days she only saw her son while he was asleep. When she came home in the morning, he was getting ready for school. When she woke up in the evening, he was already finishing dinner with the babysitter. Some nights, she stood quietly beside his bed just to hear him breathing. That was how motherhood looked sometimes. Not beautiful movie moments, just sacrifice. Quiet sacrifice. The small radio near the nurse's station played softly in the background. Elliot Reed's late-night program continued drifting through the empty hallway. Maybe growing older, Elliot said gently, is simply learning how to carry sadness more gracefully. Olivia stopped writing her notes. That sentence stayed with her, because lately, she had started wondering if she was becoming invisible, not only at work, in life. A loud cough suddenly echoed from down the hallway. Olivia immediately stood and hurried toward room 208. Inside, a middle-aged woman struggled to breathe while panic filled her exhausted eyes. "It's okay," Olivia whispered calmly. "You're okay. I'm here." She adjusted the oxygen mask gently and held the woman's trembling hand until her breathing slowed again. That was the strange thing about nurses. They spent their lives calming strangers while quietly falling apart themselves. Outside the hospital windows, snow continued falling over Chicago. Leo's taxi moved slowly through downtown streets. Samuel finished cleaning another subway car underground. Maria sat alone in the hotel break room, eating a cold pastry before sunrise. And Elliot Reed continued speaking softly into microphones, high above the sleeping city. None of them knew each other. None of them realized they were sharing the same lonely night. Yet somehow, their lives were already beginning to connect. At 4:52 a.m., Olivia finally sat down again. Her feet hurt badly now. She removed her phone from her pocket and opened a video sent earlier by her babysitter. Noah appeared on the screen, wearing dinosaur pajamas. "Good night, Mommy," he whispered sleepily into the camera. "I love you to the moon." Olivia covered her mouth quickly as tears filled her eyes. Exhaustion makes emotions heavier at night, especially before sunrise. Then suddenly, the hospital lights flickered once, just briefly. The nurses looked around in confusion. A second later, backup alarms quietly activated somewhere deep inside the building. Outside, the snowstorm had become much worse, and across Chicago, the night was slowly beginning to change. By 5:10 in the morning, the snowstorm had swallowed most of the city. Roads disappeared beneath thick layers of white. Traffic lights blinked silently through the snowfall. The distant skyline looked faded now, almost like a dream disappearing into fog. Chicago had become quiet in a way only winter could create. The kind of silence that makes people think about their lives more deeply. On the west side of the city, a small 24-hour grocery store remained open beneath flickering lights. Inside, a teenage boy named Caleb worked alone stocking shelves. He was 17 years old, thin, quiet, always tired. Most customers barely noticed him. To them, he was simply the kid arranging cereal boxes at dawn. But Caleb carried more responsibility than most adults twice his age. His mother worked 2 cleaning jobs during the day. His younger sister suffered from severe asthma, And since money disappeared faster than it arrived, Caleb started working nights 6 months ago to help pay rent. He attended school during the day, worked at night, slept whenever he could. Some weeks he forgot what day it even was. The grocery store smelled faintly of coffee and cardboard. Old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while snow pressed softly against the front windows. A tiny radio near the cashier counter played Elliot Reed's late-night show at low volume. Caleb listened every night, not because he loved radio, but because the voice helped him stay awake. He pushed a cart slowly through aisle 7, arranging canned soup carefully into neat rows. Outside, the storm grew stronger. The automatic doors opened briefly as freezing wind rushed inside. An elderly man entered wearing a long gray coat covered with snow. Caleb recognized him immediately. Mr. Adler, the old bookstore owner from 2 blocks away. He came into the store almost every morning around this time, always alone, always buying the same thing: black coffee and cat food. "Storm's getting bad," Caleb said politely while placing soup cans onto the shelf. Mr. Adler smiled faintly. "At my age, every storm feels bad." His voice carried the slow, tired humor of someone who had lived a very long life. Mr. Adler's bookstore had once been popular decades ago, back before phones replaced quiet afternoons, back when people still wandered between bookshelves for hours. Now the store barely survived. Most nights only 3 or 4 customers entered, sometimes none at all. Yet every morning, Mr. Adler still unlocked the doors, as if giving up would somehow betray the building itself. At the register, Caleb scanned the old man's items quietly. The total came to $11.42. Mr. Adler searched slowly through his pockets, then paused. His face changed slightly. Small embarrassment, the kind older people try hard to hide. "I think," he murmured softly, "I may have left my wallet at the shop." Caleb glanced at the tired old man standing beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Snow melted slowly from his coat onto the floor. Without saying anything, Caleb reached into his own pocket and paid the bill himself. Mr. Adler looked up immediately. "Oh no, son, you don't have to do that." "It's okay," Caleb answered quickly. "Really." For a moment, the old man simply stared at him. His eyes looked strangely emotional now, as though the small act of kindness had touched something deeper than Caleb realized. "You remind me of my grandson," Mr. Adler whispered quietly. Then, after a pause, he added, "He used to help people without thinking too much about it, too." Caleb smiled awkwardly. He never really knew how to react when adults became emotional around him. Outside, snow continued falling endlessly over the dark streets. Mr. Adler pulled his coat tighter before leaving. Then suddenly, he stopped near the door and turned back. "You know," he said softly, "most people become colder as the world becomes colder." His tired eyes met Caleb's. "Don't lose that softness in you." Then he disappeared back into the storm. For a long moment, Caleb stood silently near the register. The radio continued playing quietly overhead. Elliot's calm voice drifted through the nearly empty store. "Sometimes," Elliot said gently, "the smallest kindness can keep another person alive longer than we realize." Caleb looked down at the few dollars remaining in his wallet, then toward the snow outside. And for the first time in weeks, he felt just a little less exhausted. Across the city, Olivia hurried through dim hospital hallways as backup generators hummed softly beneath the building. Leo's taxi crawled carefully across icy roads. Maria prepared fresh coffee for hotel guests who would soon wake up. Samuel finished his final subway car before sunrise, and high above them all, Elliot Reed continued speaking into the darkness, unaware that thousands of lonely strangers were holding on to his voice tonight more tightly than usual. Because outside, the storm was becoming dangerous now. And before morning arrived, the lives of these strangers were about to cross in ways none of them expected. By 5:45 in the morning, the snowstorm had become the worst Chicago had seen that winter. Wind pushed violently between buildings. Snow covered parked cars almost completely. The streets looked abandoned now, as though the city itself had disappeared beneath white silence. Only a few people remained awake, and among them was Mr. Adler. The old bookstore stood quietly on a narrow corner street beneath a flickering green sign that read, "Adler Books." Several letters no longer lit properly. The windows fogged softly from the warmth inside, while snow gathered along the sidewalk outside the entrance. Mr. Adler unlocked the door slowly and stepped inside. Immediately, the familiar smell wrapped around him. Old paper, dust, coffee, aging wood. To him, it smelled like home. The bookstore had belonged to his father once, then eventually to him. And for nearly 48 years, Mr. Adler opened the store almost every single morning. Even now, even when business barely existed anymore. He removed his heavy coat carefully and hung it near the door. The old radiator hissed softly in the corner, while weak jazz music played from a tiny speaker behind the counter. Every object inside the store carried history. Bent shelves, faded carpets, handwritten price tags yellowed with time. Some books had remained there longer than certain marriages lasted. Mr. Adler walked slowly between the shelves, gently running his fingers along old spines. He always did this before opening, almost like greeting old friends. People thought bookstores were quiet because nothing happened inside them. But Mr. Adler believed the opposite. To him, bookstores were filled with thousands of human lives, waiting patiently to be opened. Love stories, wars, heartbreak, adventures. entire worlds sleeping silently on shelves. Near the back corner of the shop sat an old orange cat named Winston. The cat lifted its head lazily as Mr. Adler approached. "Well," Mr. Adler sighed softly, "looks like we survived another stormy night, old friend." Winston blinked slowly. The old man smiled faintly. After his wife passed away 8 years ago, Winston became the only living creature waiting for him at the store each morning. Loneliness changes people in quiet ways. Eventually, even a cat's presence can begin to feel deeply important. Mr. Adler turned on the small radio behind the counter. Static crackled briefly. Then Elliot Reed's familiar voice filled the shop. "And if you're awake with me tonight," Elliot said softly, "I hope you remember that your existence matters more than you think." Mr. Adler froze slightly. That sentence touched something painful inside him, because lately he had started wondering if his life still mattered at all. Business had become terrible over the past few years. Most people bought books online now. Sometimes entire afternoons passed without a single customer entering the store. His son repeatedly begged him to sell the building and retire, but Mr. Adler refused every time, because deep down, he feared retirement wasn't really retirement. He feared it was simply another word for waiting to disappear. Outside, the storm continued roaring through the city. The front windows rattled softly from powerful wind gusts. Mr. Adler sat behind the counter with a warm cup of coffee and looked around the nearly empty store. He remembered busier days, children sitting cross-legged in reading corners, couples wandering slowly through aisles together, snowy December mornings filled with conversation and laughter. Now, only silence remained, and memory. Suddenly, the bell above the front door rang softly. Mr. Adler looked up in surprise. A young woman stepped inside, covered in snow. She looked exhausted, cold, and slightly lost. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the woman glanced around the bookstore slowly and whispered, "I just needed somewhere warm for a few minutes." Mr. Adler smiled gently. "Well," he said quietly, "you came to the right place." Outside, the storm continued growing stronger, and somewhere far across the city, other tired strangers continued moving slowly toward a morning none of them would ever forget. The young woman stood quietly near the entrance of the bookstore, while snow melted from her coat onto the wooden floor. She looked no older than 30, dark hair, tired eyes, a face carrying the kind of exhaustion that sleep alone could not fix. Mr. Adler noticed immediately that her hands were trembling slightly from the cold. "Sit wherever you like," he said gently. "I'll make fresh coffee." The woman nodded gratefully. "Thank you," Her voice sounded fragile somehow, as though she had not spoken much lately. Mr. Adler disappeared behind the counter while the woman slowly wandered deeper into the bookstore. The warmth inside felt unreal after the brutal wind outside. She paused near a shelf labeled History and Travel and stared absent-mindedly at the books without truly seeing them. Sometimes people enter quiet places not because they want to stay there, but because they're trying to avoid returning somewhere else. Her name was Hannah Collins, and tonight, she did not want to go home. 3 hours earlier, Hannah had left St. Mary's Hospital after sitting beside her father's bed all night. The doctors said there was not much time left now. Maybe days, maybe less. The thought followed her through every empty street she walked tonight. Heavy, unavoidable. Mr. Adler returned carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "One for you," he said softly. Hannah accepted it carefully. "Thanks." For a moment, they sat in silence together while snow tapped gently against the windows. The bookstore felt strangely peaceful, almost disconnected from the world outside. "You own this place?" Hannah finally asked. Mr. Adler nodded. "Since 1978. Hannah looked around slowly. "It feels..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Safe." The old man smiled faintly. "That's probably because books don't rush you." The radio behind the counter continued playing softly. Elliot's calm voice drifted through the aisles. "Some nights," he said quietly, "people drive around for hours because they are afraid of what waits for them at home." Hannah lowered her eyes immediately. The sentence landed too close to the truth. "My father used to bring me to bookstores," she whispered after a long silence. Mr. Adler listened quietly. He'd disappear for hours and leave me in the children's section. A tiny smile appeared on her face. "I think he loved bookstores more than people." Mr. Adler chuckled softly. "That usually means he trusted books more than people." Hannah smiled again, a real smile this time, small but real. Outside, wind howled violently through the narrow street. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Mr. Adler glanced toward the windows. "You probably shouldn't drive in this weather." "I'm not driving," Hannah answered quietly. "I've just been walking." "Walking?" She nodded. "I didn't really know where else to go." The honesty in her voice filled the room with sudden sadness. Mr. Adler understood that feeling very well. After his wife died, he spent entire nights wandering grocery stores and pharmacies just to avoid entering his empty apartment. Loneliness makes people delay going home, because eventually, home stops feeling like home. It simply becomes the place where silence waits. At the hospital across the city, Olivia checked another patient's blood pressure while fighting exhaustion. In the subway tunnels underground, Samuel finally finished his shift and slowly prepared to leave for home. Maria stood near the hotel window sipping cold coffee while dawn crept closer outside. Leo continued driving through dangerous icy streets, listening silently to Elliot's radio show. And high above them all, Elliot himself sat alone inside the dim radio studio, unaware of how deeply his voice had become woven into the lives of strangers. Back inside the bookstore, Hannah stared at the snow outside. Then quietly she asked, "Do you ever feel like life moves too fast while you're busy surviving it?" Mr. Adler looked at her carefully before answering. "Yes." His voice became softer. "And one day you wake up and realize the people you love grew older while you weren't paying attention." Hannah felt tears gathering in her eyes again, because her father had once been strong, loud, impossible to ignore. And now machines breathed beside him while she sat helplessly watching time disappear. The radio crackled softly for a moment. Then Elliot spoke again. "If someone you love is still alive tonight, perhaps there is still time to say what matters." The bookstore fell silent. Neither Hannah nor Mr. Adler spoke, because some sentences arrive exactly when people need them most. Then suddenly, the lights flickered hard. Once, twice, and without warning, the entire bookstore went dark. Only the storm outside remained visible through the windows. And somewhere in the distance, all across Chicago, the power was beginning to fail. At exactly 6:03 a.m., large sections of Chicago lost power. One block at a time, lights vanished across the city. Apartment windows went black. Traffic signals stopped blinking. Office towers disappeared into darkness. And for the first time that night, people truly noticed the storm. Inside Adler Books, Hannah inhaled sharply as the lights died above them. Only the weak grey glow of snow outside illuminated the bookstore now. The old radiator fell silent. The jazz music stopped. Even Elliot Reed's voice disappeared from the radio mid-sentence. Sudden silence filled the room completely. Mr. Adler stood slowly from behind the counter. "Well," he sighed softly, "that doesn't happen often." He opened a drawer carefully and removed an old flashlight. The beam cut gently through the darkness between bookshelves. For some reason, the bookstore felt even older now, almost frozen in time. Outside, wind roared through the street harder than before. Snow slammed against the windows while the city disappeared beneath white chaos. Hannah stepped closer to the glass. "I should probably get back to the hospital." Mr. Adler looked outside for a long moment. "In this storm?" he asked quietly. "You may not make it very far." She knew he was right. Even the sidewalks were nearly impossible to see now. Across the city, the blackout spread rapidly. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, emergency generators activated immediately. Red backup lights glowed faintly across hallways, while alarms echoed softly in distant rooms. Olivia moved quickly between patients, checking equipment and helping nervous families remain calm. Most people panic when hospitals lose power, even briefly, because darkness inside a hospital feels different from darkness anywhere else. It reminds people how fragile life really is. Olivia stopped beside a window and looked out at the storm. The city beyond the glass had nearly vanished. For a brief moment, she wondered if her son was awake yet, if he was scared, if he missed her. Then another alarm sounded down the hallway, and once again, she pushed her own feelings aside and kept moving. That was what survival looked like sometimes. Not bravery, just continuing. Meanwhile, underground, Samuel sat alone on a subway platform after learning all train service had been suspended. The station around him felt eerie without electricity. Emergency lights cast long shadows across empty tracks. Somewhere, water dripped steadily in the darkness. Samuel wrapped his old coat tighter around himself and listened to the distant storm vibrating through the tunnels above. For the first time in years, the city felt vulnerable. Elsewhere, Leo's taxi crawled slowly through nearly invisible streets. Snow buried the roads faster than plows could clear them. Several cars had already been abandoned near intersections. The radio signal faded in and out now. Static swallowed Elliot's voice repeatedly. Then, finally, silence. Leo tapped the dashboard gently. Nothing. The station was gone. For some reason, that unsettled him more than the storm itself. High above downtown Chicago, inside the darkened radio station, Elliot Reed removed his headphones slowly. The emergency lights glowed dim red around the studio. His producer entered quickly. "We lost transmission." Elliot looked out the giant windows toward the city. Chicago had become a shadow beneath the snowstorm. He had spent years speaking to lonely strangers every night, and suddenly, all those invisible connections had gone quiet at once. Back inside the bookstore, Mr. Adler lit several old candles and placed them around the room. Warm, golden light flickered softly against endless shelves of books. The atmosphere changed immediately. The store no longer felt lonely. Now it felt protective somehow, like a shelter from the storm outside. Hannah sat quietly holding her coffee with both hands while candlelight danced gently across her tired face. "You know," Mr. Adler said softly, "when I was young, blackouts happened all the time." Hannah looked up. "And people hated them?" The old man smiled faintly. "No." He glanced toward the dark windows. People talked more back then. Outside, the storm continued swallowing the city whole. But inside, tiny pockets of warmth across Chicago, strangers were beginning to slow down, to speak, to listen. And before the morning was over, several lives that had traveled separately through the long winter night were about to collide in ways none of them could yet imagine. By 6:40 a.m., Chicago no longer looked like itself. The storm had erased familiar shapes from the city. Cars sat buried beneath snowbanks. Street signs leaned beneath heavy ice. Entire blocks remained dark after the blackout. And yet, inside scattered buildings across the city, life continued quietly. People adapted. Humans always do. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, Olivia finally paused long enough to drink half a cup of cold coffee. The generators still hummed beneath the building, but everyone remained tense. Too many patients, too little sleep, too much uncertainty. She rubbed her aching neck slowly while staring out at the storm through a narrow hallway window. Then, suddenly, her phone vibrated. A message from the babysitter. "Power's out here too. Noah has a fever. Olivia's stomach dropped instantly. A mother's fear moves faster than logic. She immediately called. No answer. Again. Nothing. The storm was interfering with signals now. Olivia stood frozen for a moment while panic quietly rose inside her chest. Then another patient called for help down the hallway, and once again, she had to choose between her child and everyone else's. Across the city, Leo finally decided to stop driving. The roads had become too dangerous. He parked beside a small diner glowing faintly with emergency lighting and stepped out into knee-deep snow. The wind hit him immediately like frozen knives. Inside the diner, only 4 people sat scattered across booths. A tired waitress poured coffee beneath dim, battery-powered lanterns. Everyone looked strangely calm. Disasters sometimes create unusual peace. People stop pretending during difficult moments. Leo ordered black coffee and sat near the window watching snow bury the empty streets. The silence inside the diner felt different from ordinary silence. Softer, more connected. For the first time in years, nobody stared at phones. Nobody rushed anywhere. People simply sat together quietly while the storm moved around them. Near downtown, Samuel slowly climbed the subway stairs into the blizzard above. The cold air struck his face hard. He stopped immediately. The city looked unreal. No traffic, no bright advertisements, no endless movement, just snow falling over sleeping buildings. For some reason, it reminded him of childhood mornings before the world became complicated, before funerals, before loneliness, before people started disappearing from his life one by one. As Samuel walked carefully through the storm, he noticed something ahead near a bus stop. A teenage boy curled beneath a thin jacket, shivering violently. Caleb. The grocery store had closed early after losing electricity, and buses had stopped running hours ago. He had tried walking home, but the storm became too strong. Samuel hurried toward him immediately. "Kid?" Caleb lifted his head weakly. His lips were pale from cold. Without hesitation, Samuel removed his own heavy coat and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. "You'll freeze out here," he said firmly. "I'm okay," Caleb lied softly. Samuel almost smiled. People always say that when they're not okay. A few blocks away, inside Adler Books, candlelight still flickered warmly across shelves. Hannah sat quietly, listening while Mr. Adler told stories about the old Chicago winters of the 1970s. For the first time all night, she wasn't thinking
about hospitals, or death, or fear. She was simply listening. Sometimes healing begins with distraction. Then suddenly, someone pounded hard against the bookstore door. Both Hannah and Mr. Adler looked up immediately.
Outside through the swirling snow stood Maria, covered in white, breathing heavily, cold and exhausted. Mr. Adler quickly unlocked the door and helped her inside. "Oh, thank God," Maria whispered shakily. "The hotel lost heat." Her hands trembled badly from cold. Hannah immediately stood and helped her remove her frozen gloves. For a moment, the three strangers simply looked at one another beneath candlelight while the storm screamed outside. And without realizing it, something important had begun. Not friendship exactly, not yet, but the beginning of human connection, the kind people desperately need during difficult nights. High above the city, inside the silent radio station, Elliot Reed stared helplessly at dead broadcasting equipment. No signal, no music, no voice reaching the lonely people listening below. He suddenly realized how much the show mattered to him too. Not because of success, not because of money, but because every night, speaking into the darkness made him feel less alone. Then, Elliot made a decision. He grabbed his coat. "If the city can't hear me from here," he told his producer quietly, "maybe I should go out into it." And far below, through snow and darkness, the lives of strangers were moving closer together with every passing hour. By 7:15 a.m., the storm had completely taken over Chicago. Snow buried sidewalks faster than workers could clear them. Emergency sirens echoed faintly through white darkness. Power remained out across huge sections of the city. Morning had arrived, but the city still looked trapped in the middle of the night. Inside Adler Books, warmth slowly returned to the frozen hands of the three strangers gathered there. Candles flickered softly across shelves, while snow pressed against the windows outside. Maria sat near the radiator, wrapped in an old blanket Mr. Adler found in the back room. Hannah handed her a warm cup of coffee. "You walked here?" Hannah asked gently. Maria nodded tiredly. "The buses stopped running." She gave a weak laugh. "I think I got lost twice." Mr. Adler smiled softly. "That's normal during storms." But deep down, all three of them understood something strange was happening. The storm had forced people to stop moving. And when people stop moving, they start noticing each other. Maria slowly looked around the bookstore. "I used to love places like this," she whispered. Mr. Adler raised an eyebrow. "Used to?" Maria stared into her coffee for a moment. Life got expensive. The honesty in her voice filled the room quietly, because everyone there understood exactly what she meant. Dreams often disappear slowly, not because people stop caring about them, but because survival becomes louder. Meanwhile, several blocks away, Samuel and Caleb struggled carefully through deep snow together. Samuel kept one hand firmly on the teenager's shoulder, while freezing wind roared around them. "You got family nearby?" Samuel asked. Caleb nodded weakly. "Mom and sister." "You live far?" "About 20 minutes." Samuel sighed quietly. In this storm, 20 minutes felt like another country. They eventually spotted the faint glow of a diner through the snow. Leo's diner. Samuel pushed the door open carefully. Warm air immediately wrapped around them. The waitress behind the counter looked up in surprise. "Oh my lord," she whispered. "You two look frozen." Leo glanced over from his booth. The old subway cleaner and exhausted teenager stood dripping melted snow across the floor. Without hesitation, Leo stood. "Sit down," he said firmly. "I'll buy breakfast." Caleb immediately shook his head. "You don't have to." "Yes," Leo interrupted gently. "I do." Moments later, hot coffee and scrambled eggs sat steaming beneath soft lantern light. The storm outside became invisible behind fogged windows. Samuel removed his gloves slowly, warming his stiff fingers near the mug. Leo studied him quietly for a moment. "You work nights?" he asked. Samuel nodded. "Subway cleaning." Leo smiled faintly. "Taxi driver." For some reason, that simple exchange carried immediate understanding. Night workers recognize each other. The exhaustion, the silence, the strange loneliness of sleeping while the rest of the world lives. Caleb ate quickly at first, then slower, as though his body was finally remembering what warmth felt like. The waitress quietly placed extra toast beside him without charging anything. He looked up in surprise. She only smiled. Storms make people softer sometimes. Across the city, Olivia finally managed to reach her babysitter by phone. Noah's fever had risen slightly, but he was safe. Still, guilt sat heavily inside her chest. Every sick child at the hospital suddenly reminded her of her own son. She wanted desperately to leave, to go home, to hold him. But the storm had trapped everyone exactly where they were needed most. And so Olivia continued moving room to room beneath dim emergency lighting, while exhaustion slowly hollowed her out from the inside. High above downtown, Elliot Reed stepped into the blizzard, carrying a portable recorder and microphone inside his coat. His producer thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. But Elliot suddenly could not stand sitting safely inside the dark studio while the city struggled alone beneath the storm. He wanted to see the people who filled the lonely silence every night. The invisible people. The ones awake while everyone else slept. As Elliot walked through snow-covered streets, he noticed something unusual. Despite the blackout, despite the storm, people were helping each other everywhere. Strangers pushing stuck cars, restaurant owners giving away soup, neighbors checking on elderly residents. For the first time in years, the city felt human again. Back inside Adler Books, Hannah noticed an old piano tucked near the corner of the store. "You play?" she asked Mr. Adler. The old man chuckled softly. "Badly." Maria smiled faintly. That's usually the best kind. For the first time all night, Mr. Adler laughed. A real laugh. Small, rusty, but real. And something inside the bookstore changed after that. The storm outside still raged. The city was still dark. People were still lonely, still grieving, still exhausted. But somehow, inside that tiny bookstore, life no longer felt quite as heavy.
you